People ask me that question all the time. How many scenarios do we need to do, especially in a Basel or an AMA context? So there is the requirement that you have scenario analysis in your framework. The response I most often give is, how do you want scenarios to work for your organization, and how are you going to use them in your overall framework? So if you're using them as a direct input to your quantification model, you may take a very different approach than if you're using them for risk management purposes and a stress test or a worst case scenario. What all moving parts do we need to consider? If you're doing a scenario analysis around influenza pandemic, that takes a much different construction and much different approach than if you're saying, what's the worst loss I could have from a rogue trader? So the major consideration is how you frame the question, and the reference points you give people for thinking of their response has a tremendous influence on what their response is going to be. So if you go back to some of the research in the 1980s around scenario analysis, framing a question in one manner, lives saved versus lives lost, people tend to gravitate towards the lives saved, even though the probability of both is the same. People have a natural gravitation towards, the positive effect. So moving that to a financial context, if you're talking about how can we increase profitability or how can we decrease earnings or decrease losses, will have a tremendous effect on how you construct your scenario. Also, people are using what we call external data to help drive people's thinking about scenarios. So if you think most people have a long banking career, maybe 25 or 30 years, and you're asking people to come up with probabilities of a 1 in 100-year event, it's really hard for people to get their hands around that time frame, and especially if it's never happened at their organization. So people are using external data to help prompt people to how they think about the probability and severity of an event. Well, if you're giving them 5 external data points that all cluster around a single dollar figure or a single set of occurrences, people are going to give you, very similar results. So it's the validation of scenarios, I think, is going to be a tremendous administrative burden for people going forward. I'd say maybe as a best practice is kind of the old military exercise where people are allowed to give their opinions either anonymously or some way to avoid having either the most senior person or the most influential person in the room skew the results towards what their view may be. So just like you don't want, a private would never contradict what the general would say, you don't want a low-level person in a scenario workshop may be reluctant to speak up if the CFO or CEO is sitting in the same room. So a way to get independent results or views, whether it's anonymous or not, I think is key. I think the bigger challenge is as you think about scenarios, and particularly across some of our largest organizations where you have hundreds of thousands of employees and you may conduct literally hundreds of scenario workshops, you've got to have somebody that ensures the consistency of approach across the entire organization and document how you went about it this time, because next time the same people may not be in the room and they're going to say, how on earth did Preston come up with this scenario when Preston's long gone?